Greetings. My name is Francisco Aragon, and I direct Letras Latinas, the literary initiative at the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies. Welcome to Curated Conversations, a Latinx poetry show. Today's program features Dr. Grisel Y. Acosta in conversation with Gisenia Montilla, discussing Grisel's book, Things to Pack on the Way to Everywhere, a finalist for the 9th edition of the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize, and subsequently picked up by Get Fresh Books. But before I pass the baton to and introduce Gisenia, I want to thank a few people. The Writers Center has agreed to host us on their platform, and I want to thank Zach Powers, Director of Communications, whose tech expertise and eye for design have been crucial. I also want to thank Executive Director Margaret Melanie for her endorsement and support. I also want to acknowledge the Writers Center's in-house publication, Poet Lore, with whom Letras Latinas collaborated a few years ago, and who will have a yet-to-be-determined role in our collaboration at the conclusion of this year-long project. A shout out as well to Angela Spring of Duende District, who will be handling the book-selling component of Curated Conversations. Duende District is another co-presenter. Finally, a program as ambitious as this, one that will involve 24 participants, would not be possible without funding. The Poetry Foundation is our principal institutional benefactor. In addition, I want to thank Jim Wilson, whose generous patronage is making possible a parallel book club activity for the debut Latinx books we have been exploring and will be exploring in the next several months. In fact, the book club component for today's installment will be overseen by poet Ruth Irupe Sanabria. One of the special traits of Curated Conversations is that we ask the debut Latinx poets in question to select their interlocutors. Dr. Grisel Y. Acosta has invited Gisenia Montilla. I don't know if Gisenia remembers this, but a number of years ago at a Split This Rock Poetry Festival in Washington, D.C., a number of the sessions were being held in the small ground floor auditorium of the University of California building where Letras Latinas, since 2007, has maintained an office. One mid-morning during the festival that year, I wandered downstairs into a Split This Rock session taking place. I don't remember the topic or theme of the multi-poet panel. I don't, I lament to admit, remember any of the poets themselves, except one, Gisenia Montilla. I was a blank slate as far as her work was concerned, but I recall being mesmerized by what I'll call her understated but simmering deliveries, ones that hovered, to my mind, a notch or two above a whisper, the way the poems worked slowly, cumulatively, inviting the audience into their intimate worlds. She may have read, and here she can correct me, a piece titled Ode to the Mouth. Here's a snippet. Wordsmith, dirty word slinger, linguist, tú dices amor, and it is so. In your various forms, I learn how a little boat must feel against the current. I want to set you free. I've been a huge fan of her work ever since and had the pleasure of teaching her book, The Pink Box, last semester and having her as a Zoom guest in my class. Gisenia has worked with Letras Latinas before, for which we were so grateful. She served as a screener for the last edition of the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize. Those of us who love her work are thrilled that it won't be much longer until Four-Way Books brings out her next poemario, due out next year, titled Muse found in a colonized body. Please welcome Gisenia Montilla.
Saludos, everyone. Thank you, Francisco, for that beautiful introduction. I do remember that day. I did read Ode to the Mouth, and I do remember you coming up to me afterwards. So it is a memory that we both share, and I appreciate you bringing it up because it takes me back to times before the pandemic when we were all together in rooms. I am excited for the curating conversations and being here with Grisel. So I'm going to just jump in and read her bio so we can start out. Dr. Grisel Yolanda Acosta is an associate professor at the University of New York, BCC. Her poetry collection, Things to Pack on the Way to Everywhere, was a finalist for the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize and will be out in a few short days, maybe, or a few weeks with Get Fresh Books. I'm so excited. She's the editor of Latina Outsiders, Remaking Latina Identity. And if you don't have that, you should really, really, really grab it. Her work, scholarly and creative, have appeared in so many anthologies that I had to cut this down because the list was so long. And I really wanted to just jump into all the questions that I have for her today. She received her PhD in English, Latinx literature from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and has presented and published in her creative work and scholarly work all over the world and throughout the US. Dr. Acosta is currently working on First Spanish, which tells the story of Chicago's Logan Square neighborhood in the 1980s and 1990s. And I just want to say thank you to Grisel for choosing me to interview you today. It means the world. I feel so grateful and honored and just in awe of the new work that you have coming out into the world. I wanted to read a snippet of something that I wrote about your work before we jump in. I wrote about it. She is boisterous and inquisitive. She is challenging and precise. Her many sides rattle us. She's a dream weaver, music archivist, child of the diaspora. This work, these poems are a refreshingly and indispensable voice in the poetry of the Americas. And I meant that. I really did, and I still do, and I can't wait for everything that comes from you in the future. I just want to know first, how are you doing today, and how excited are you about the new collection?
Hi, Yesenia. Thank you so much for doing this. And before I tell you how I'm doing today, I just want to thank the Writers Center, the Poetry Foundation, obviously Letras Latinas, and Francisco, you, Zach. This is amazing, and I just feel so blessed to be here. And I am incredibly moved by the introduction that Francisco gave and the introduction that you just gave me. I feel very happy, very blessed, very thankful, very fortunate. I'm excited. I'm here. I'm excited. That's how I'm feeling.
I actually wanted to start off just so folks can enter your work with the title of the collection. Things to Pack on the Way to Everywhere for me was really striking. As Francisco had mentioned, I was one of the screeners for the Andres Montoya Prize. And that was the first thing that caught my eye was the title. And then, of course, digging into the work and seeing how beautiful and multifaceted it was. I feel like the title is something about, it mentions a journey, but not a concrete destination. And the poem is a list poem, which are my favorite types of poems. And I was wondering what came first, the poem, right? Or the title? How did you choose that this is going to be the title for the book? And how did you choose which poems you felt fit into this collection?
Excuse me. So it's kind of very strange the way that it all came about, truthfully. So I was putting together the collection, just what I felt was a strong collection of my work that really represented all of the different things that I do poetically. And what I saw was that these were all things related to my journeys in different places, but also things that I felt I was keeping along the way of those journeys to pretty much anywhere I went, things that I kept along the way that would allow me to survive whatever it was that I was experiencing. So the collection came together, the title came next. The title poem actually came much later. I didn't think that I was going to have a title poem. I thought that the collection itself would kind of imply what the title meant, especially the way that it's organized. It's literally organized in sections that imply a journey. But then for some reason, I don't know if it's because pre-production was during the pandemic and all of us were thinking about survival in a different way. I think that at that point, it really started to culminate in my mind, the title poem itself. So, I asked my publisher, Roberto Carlos Garcia at Get Fresh, can I stick this one in? It's literally the title poem. I'm sorry it came so late. And of course, he was more than happy to put the title poem in. And maybe I should just read that poem
Please.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
let me pull that up. And I think I might have put that in my grouping of poems as the last thing that I was going to read, but why not read it first? So here we go. Things to pack on the way to everywhere. Scent of a morning Weymouth pine forest that huddled under lightning storms at the midnight hour. Palo Santo, shea butter, both surprised gifts from a friend. One speckled igneous rock your mother painted with clear polish. Son lindos cuando brillan. Unseen prism hues in dew. Apricot afterglow of sunset resting on your father's face de canela. 3 nibbled acorns, carelessly discarded items by the precocious periwinkle hare. A gold goblet of bitter wine. Nina Cherry's fuck off pose. Recetas de abuela, bollo de yuca y arroz con leche. The melancholy of the long-eared owls, hoo, hoo, hoo. A blue towel of Turkish cotton, the thwack of drunk slapping a surprised abuser. Pens in blue and green, a scroll made of linen and embers, prayer cards to the Holy Trinity of AOC, SCOTUS Justice Sotomayor, La Lupe. Rita's anemone. Homemade marshmallows, teriyaki beef jerky, organic raisins, and jumbo cashews, a carving of my lover's eyelashes. Tears of a rooster 5 minutes before dawn, Cuban o puertorriqueño, no importa, son los mismos. 2 wax candles, a phallus, a vulva, made by an androgynous palinquerex, anointed by heliconius butterflies, reminding us mimicry is the tool of saints. Jesse de la Peña's Chicago scratch, 1 chartreuse paint chip scratched off of a rusty sign in San Antonio, a lick of cold gin slid off a New Jersey ice luge while a flanneled comedian sings stories to his dream-deferred cousins at 4 a.m. Camphor lip balm, matches. The bag will be small, light, contain unseen sub-universes that on occasion will emit their own luminescence.
Thank you so much for reading it. I find that this poem is so successful because it actually allows us to know so much about the speaker of the poem without having to like just dive deep into any other poem. That right there just kind of centers you in, and then it begs you like, what else? What else does she have coming for us? And I find that you have all of these scattered poems throughout the collection that have to do with themes like family, death. But there's one theme that I want to touch on, which is punk. I know that when I first met you, Grisel, what I first saw was like your really, really cool demeanor and your fashion. And I felt like you were connected to like an underground scene that felt really familiar to me. There's one poem in your collection, Hardcore Chica Punk First Fragments. And I resonated with that poem for a lot of reasons, but particularly that moment with the Halloween costume. I think that I can probably go through my mom's archives of photos of me and find a 10-year-old me with a costume that's similar to that. Punk was important for me, but I think too that a lot of folks have like a caricature picture now of what punk was or is. And I want you to talk a little bit about what punk is to you and what that aesthetic means to you. And also like, what are the influences that you pull from it to add to your work? Because I do feel that that part of you like really brings the duende into your work. And it's important for you to talk about that and share that with folks. So can you talk a little bit about punk?
Absolutely. So just an homage to punk, I have my little rude boy outfit today and my little freak pin and everything.
Yes.
So yeah, so I do like the fashion, but yes, it's become a caricature. And I do want to point out the poem that you're referencing, it's had many forms. So it's actually been a monologue at times, which was performed through In Full Color, which is founded by Summer Dawn. And anyway, that picture that you're talking about, I mentioned that I'm basically wearing, I'm like in maybe 6th grade or something like that. And I'm wearing a trash bag and a sequin belt and everything. And this is what spoke to me when I saw like videos by Duran Duran and Shriekback that were being broadcast on TV when I was a kid. The aesthetic really, really spoke to me, but also the freedom in terms of gender identity. So for me, when I really took a deep dive into punk as an ideology, it was really an escape from sexism. From many different places, I was being pushed into a gender normativity that I did not appreciate. At one point, I mentioned this in another poem, not in this collection, but elsewhere, where someone who I knew was actually signed me up to become homecoming queen without my knowledge. And that sort of behavior amongst really not just the men in my life, but even the women in my life, it was incredibly confining and upsetting to me. And I found that as soon as I showed up at school with like blue lipstick and spiked hair, people started leaving me alone. But that wasn't as easy as at home. Like, whereas my mom kind of allowed it to happen, my dad had a huge issue with that. Which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But that said, in terms of my poetics, initially, the music of punk, because it is so ironic and because it has a great sense of humor and because it interrogates patriarchy, capitalism, and other forms of fascism, that I immediately gravitated towards, and I draw upon it as an inspiration for my work. But I also want folks to realize that punk is not just the music that is defined as punk, and it's not just the fashion. The core of it is really, for me, that interrogation of societal norms, and not just societal norms, but things that we might assume about the world and ourselves. So there are poems in the collection, such as Mother, Father, Child of the Americas, where I'm not only interrogating colonialism, but also I draw parallels between how really Spain is the child of the Americas, because it wouldn't be bathed in gold if it weren't stolen from us, right? So we basically gave birth to the modern day Spain and Europe in various ways. But I also draw parallels between that and the way in which my mom has given so much to me, and how she was not necessarily thinking about her own goals throughout her life, so that I could become this person who is absolutely allowed to think about her goals. So for me, the punk aesthetic, it draws from the things that I just mentioned: a sense of humor, please, interrogating societal norms, irony, and making sure that you're checking yourself. It's really like a check and balance. So that is all of that's going to be found in my poetics.
I definitely feel all of that. And you mentioned like also like the idea of your dad not being like too keen on your punk sensibility. I know that family is like huge theme throughout the book, but also like how can family not be a huge theme for us, right? I'm wondering, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the poem Beneath the Ivy. Can we talk a little bit about that poem and the father in it and the daughter? I feel like the poem has these deep underlying tones of a kind of feminism that is really action-based, not word-based. The speaker's trying to grapple with womanhood and fatherhood as it collides in Latinx family structures. I love that poem. I feel like this interview is probably going to be me just begging you to read poems that I love. So can you talk a little bit about that? Talk about the poem, talk about father-daughter relationship, and just tell me like how it felt. Like I'm always asking poets, how does it feel to write about family so intimately? So I guess that's part of it too. And if you could read it also, that would be beautiful.
All right. I mean, I'll read it. Let me see if I had it marked for reading.
And if
Maybe
you
not.
didn't, it's fine. Then people just need to buy the book and read it for themselves and know all of the things that I'm talking about when it comes to this poem, which opened up so many things for me. And I think it'll open up so many things for so many women in regards to their relationship with their dad.
Yeah, I didn't put it aside to read, but I will definitely talk a bit about it.
Awesome.
So yes, please buy the book if you're interested in reading the poem. But basically it's, when we moved my parents in with us, me and my partner, there were certain things that we had to decide to keep. And my father was a very, very accomplished man. He was a community leader in Chicago. And he, at one point in my life, if you walked anywhere in Logan Square, which was predominantly Puerto Rican and Polish at the time, people would just stop my dad like he was this star, you know. And it wasn't that he was a star, it's just that he had worked with pretty much everyone in the community. So everyone was always saying, hey, reverendo, reverendo. And so anyway, he had a lot of documentation of his successes, like just awards and awards and awards and all this stuff. And when my parents needed some help with their care and we moved them in, we had to decide, well, which ones are we keeping? And one of the ones that we kept, obviously, was the diploma that he got from Princeton. And I put it right outside of my office in my house, just as something to remember him by. But then I started to realize that I had these feelings. And basically, I grew up in a household where I was very, very much loved. I mean, I knew my parents told me they loved me every day, and they supported me, and they looked after me. But because I was radical and they didn't understand what that meant, it literally meant that I was doing all the things that they did in the community. But I was just dressed differently and I was queer. Because they didn't get that part of it, and they kind of subscribed to respectability politics. They did not, and mainly my dad, he did not believe, at one point, he didn't think I was going to graduate high school. I already had a scholarship to a college. He did not believe that the Ivy Leagues were something that I could ever aspire to. So I just assumed I couldn't aspire to it. I just didn't even bother ever applying to an Ivy League school, for graduate school, for my PhD, nothing, even though my college career, straight A's practically. So that poem is kind of just trying to reconcile what that felt like, this assumption that I don't think would have happened if I had been straight, like just fully straight, which I pretended to be for many, many years. I don't think that this would have happened if I hadn't been such a feminist. He was a feminist and believed in women going to school, but he did not understand attacking gender norms. So it's complicated, man. It's a really painful poem. It's a painful poem. Yeah.
I mean, I resonated with it in a lot of ways, even though you and I have very different upbringings. I could still pull a lot of expectations and lack of expectations from the text. And I'm so grateful that you wrote it, because I think it has somehow changed my scene. So I wanted to bring that up, and I do hope that when folks purchase your new collection, they spend time with that poem, because it's incredibly radical and super just gorgeous and opening. I know that your dad.
Can I just say one thing about it too?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I wasn't, because I have felt such pain and shame around that poem. I wasn't going to include it in the collection. And Danny Schott, who he was the first person to publish it, I want to say on Red Fez, he insisted when he read the manuscript and blurbed it, he was like, why isn't Beneath the Ivy in here? It is a very good poem. It has to be. So I just wanted to shout him out on that.
It's an amazing poem, and I'm glad that he actually convinced you to add it or reminded you of the importance of it. So I was mentioning that I know that your dad has passed, and you and I have had conversations, and you mentioned to me that Willie Perdomo said about your work that you have an intimate relationship with death. I found that I couldn't stop thinking about it, actually, to be like, if someone told me that about my work and how I would sit with that. And I guess my question is, well, first, do you agree with Willie? And then I'm thinking also about a particular poem that sort of reminds me of survival, which is Ways of Seeing My Brothers. I don't know if that's one of the poems that you had set to read, but I'm thinking of that. I want to know if you agree with Willie, and then also if you do, how does that intimacy come? How do you make that intimacy come across on a blank page? Like, how do you sit with that blank page and have that intimacy come through? What are the craft elements that you made, and or what are some of like your rituals that you go through in order to be able to like really sit with that theme and write towards it and through it?
Yeah. I had a prepared answer for this question because we had talked about this before, and I think I'm going to take it into a slightly different space. So first of all, I want to point out, and this was something that I had planned on saying, when Willie first mentioned that to me, I was absolutely surprised. And I think that it's just so ridiculous that I was surprised because it's so clearly in the book. Literally, the organizational pattern of the book is a life cycle and beyond. So it's just funny how sometimes we are writing things and it's like it's really just coming through us and we don't know that we're writing it. And I feel like I feel like that was that pattern, that intimate relationship is something that has been in my life for a very, very long time. It's like an ancient soul in my life, and I'm just now really prepared to write about it because first of all, as a woman of color, as someone who is a radical thinker and not ashamed to call it radical thinking, as someone who is anti-capitalist, anti-neoliberal, we encounter someone who's queer, we encounter situations where we're in danger a lot. And it's not just me, it's all of my friends that I grew up with. I mean, I have poems like Life on the Playground, where kids are just playing with death in urban playgrounds. I mean, it's just what we did. And it was because our parents were working so hard. It's because our schools were overcrowded and there weren't enough people actually looking after us. And I think that really all I try to do is find those moments that have lingered with me, right? There are these moments that I have where, whether it was someone who was family or I'm very close with, like in the poem about my brothers, which I will read, or if it's just a stranger. Like I have another poem where I reference someone who I met kind of like at a halfway house when I ran away from my parents' house as a kid. And this kid mentioned to me that his mom, who was a drug addict, had set his bed on fire, and that's why he was at the halfway house. These moments linger with me. I remember them. I can't forget them. Some people choose, right? Or they're so traumatized, they do forget legitimately, like they just push it. But for some reason, that punk aesthetic forces me to face these realities so that hopefully we can learn from them and value life. It's not easy to do, but I guess, when you walk down the street, and not so much nowadays, but back in the 80s when I was coming of age, when you walk down the street with your head shaved, wearing combat boots and, black lipstick, everybody's got something to say, and you have to develop a very thick skin. So I am not afraid to face these things. It's not comfortable and I make mistakes, but I'm not afraid to face them. At least right now I'm not. I don't know if it'll change in a day or two. But let me read this poem. Because I did have this one sectioned out to read. And it's an homage to my brothers, another list poem. It just happens to be that way. But I have a challenging relationship with my brothers, and this was the way for me to show them that I love them, and to make sure that they knew that to make sure that they were aware that that I had these feelings for them. So this is ways of seeing my brothers. Uno, you are precise artisans, designing aircrafts meant to soar above the alto cumulus, or pumping air through pulsating through twists of brass trumpet, pressing fingers down on valves to scream higher than a jet. Dos, smirking boys in a 70s photograph, unaware of the holes in your socks. Tres, fearless little men walking into classrooms filled with children who will only think to ask, are you a spick? Cuatro, I do not see you in jail the night you totaled mommy's car. I do not see you stoned or geeked out, lonely and alienated in the college dorm. I do not see you terrified when you see no options in the want ads. I do not see you when you cry alone when your best friend fell in a rain of bullets. I only see the miraculous feat of survival, how you managed the impossible, staying alive when the world told you every day you did not exist. Cinco, I remember the day your daughter was born, dear brother, and you had to fill out a form, choose black or white. Your oblivious white wife saw the X by the word black and asked you, why? And you said, well, I sure as hell ain't white. And all of a sudden, you gave your own kind of birth. Seis, I wore your clothes, walked like what we call a boy, talked knucklehead talk, became what you were. Siete, the only time I met Tío Segundo in Cuba, who built his home with black market wood, his dirty workman jeans, the same as the ones I saw on you, brother, after a day of roofing. And my heart hurt because I knew the two of you needed each other, drank yourselves into oblivion because you longed for each other, yet you would never meet. Ocho, I listened at your doors. Devo, bang, 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 Santana, black magic for hours, wondered in AC/DC electric curiosity fizzling like guitar feedback, waited for you to open the passageway. Nueve, are you safe, dear brothers? I cannot protect you from this obsession with your demise. All I can offer is what I have seen. Remember, what I see is beauty.
Yeah, I have two brothers, so that poem really gets to me. So thank you for reading it. It's really a poem about survival too, which is a huge theme, not death, but survival. And we've talked about Audre Lorde and what place she has and how vital she's been to us. Audre says it is better to speak, remembering we were meant never to survive, right? And I think I'm paraphrasing maybe a little bit. But there's that urgency in me to do that. And I know that it's there in you. You also have mentioned Gloria Anzaldúa as being the person that's helped you see and develop as a scholar and writer. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, I have two questions. The first one is, would you read something or can you talk about how Gloria's work has influenced your work, particularly your poetry? I'm thinking of a poem, but maybe I won't say it because I'll see what you come up with in terms of that. And then if you don't say that poem, I'll say it because I really want you to read this particular poem. But then the other question is, if not, I always think about this, if not Audre Lorde, then who is it for me? And so for you, if not Audre Lorde, if not Gloria Anzaldúa, if they did not exist, who would be some of your other influences?
Yeah, so I thought about this a lot because I've had this incredible opportunity to talk about and write about Audre Lorde several times this year. Once through the Black Queer Revolutions event that was held at the CUNY Graduate Center and the Center for Humanities, and then there's also an essay that I wrote about Audre Lorde that's coming out soon. So I've been thinking about her a lot, and Anzaldúa, yes. Let me start with Audre. So both of them have influenced the world, not just me. Whether the world knows it or not, people are saying their words and they don't even know it, right? Because a lot of people don't credit them. But I have to get a little bit specific about how Audre Lorde influenced me. The first work of hers that I read was Zami when I was in the Master's in Education program at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And that book became like everything for me. Her description of colorism within her own family gave me a better language for the colorism within my own family, which I also have in this collection. I mentioned that in several poems. And then I also adored, and this helps me today, actually. It's helped me for the last 20 years, I would say. I adored learning about her different path, how she became a librarian, and how her path was not like this cookie cutter path that so many of us were taught that we were going to have to follow. So her messy and unique experience, it really served as like a model for me when I got to New York years later. And when I did get to New York, I looked for her in every bookstore. There were so many bookstores in New York then, which so many have since closed. I bought the collected poems of Audre Lorde at Coliseum Books. And when I read her poetry, the truths in them did feel very punk and radical to me. These were poems that, again, would provide me with tools for survival. Now, Anzaldúa, I thought that I feel like her influence is a little bit harder to pinpoint because she is harder to pinpoint. But what I can say is that there are two things that I think of when I think of her. The first thing that I think of is women gathering. Like there's something about her words that gathers women through anthologies, at the kitchen table, at intellectual gatherings. And the other thing that I think of is hybrid experimental writing. She had this gorgeous way of writing, full of exciting imagery and daring experimentation that folks like me, unsuccessfully, are still trying to emulate, merging poetry, creative nonfiction, scholarship. I adore it and am so inspired by it. And I did try to merge these different genres when I edited Latina Outsiders Remaking Latina Identity. But honestly, and gracias to Gloria for the inspiration, but honestly, the Bridge anthologies, they are timeless. And I continue to go back to them all the time. I feel like that is it for a very long time. And another thing that I want to bring up about Anzaldúa is her essay, How to Tame a Wild Tongue, which also exhibits her hybrid creativity. My students really, really respond to that poem. And the issues in it are still so relevant today. There's still a lot of isolationism here in the United States, and people think that knowing more than one language, specifically Spanish, is a detriment. Some people believe that. I don't know. it's clearly a white supremacist tactic, but it's anyway, I feel that essay speaks to my students quite a bit, and I appreciate everything that they end up creating and sharing after they've read it. I don't want to imagine a world where these women didn't exist. I really don't. It would be a worse world. But there are many, many other women that inspire me, and the ones that that I would say influence this collection, Things to Pack on the Way to Everywhere, and Latina Outsiders, are Polystyrene from X-Ray Specs, and Alice Bagg, who she was basically one of the founders. People call her the founder of hardcore music. And she's still an amazing force writing about the wage gap and consent in all of her music. And she's just amazing. She's an inspiration. So, and she's also an amazing essayist. She has several books about her adventures, Alice Bagg. So, and Polystyrene was an environmentalist way before a lot of other people have caught on to the game. So I just feel like there's so many amazing women out there. I could go on and on, really, but I will pause. And I'm not sure what poem you wanted me to read.
I actually wanted to hear We Carry the Earth. I don't know if you have that on your list.
I do have it on my list, but I was hoping to share something that communicated, I don't know if we have time for 2 more poems, maybe one a little bit later, but I was hoping to share something that had a little bit of more of a musical quality so that people know that there are these weird hybrid
Chicago
songs
DJ
in the
remix.
collection.
Right?
Sorry?
Chicago DJ remix.
I wasn't going to actually share Chicago DJ Remix. I was actually going to share Pity Party, which is the song about...
Like, I feel like those 2 poems really have a lot of sound work. And they show sort of like you were talking about this experimentation and being an experimental writer. And so I feel that in those poems. So either or, I would love to hear them. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to share Pity Party because I'm really super happy that we have leadership that actually wants to take responsibility for our country right now. And I just want to remind people that is incredibly fragile. And I want to remind people how we felt when the overt fascist took office. And that's when I wrote this. So I really want to share Pity Party. So I'm going to share that. And let me see if I can find it in my little list here. Yeah, here we go. Okay. And this will give me energy too. And hopefully it'll wake up our audience members who were so happy are here too. Okay. So Pity Party. This is a song to sing when encountering fascism. Fascism's back in town again. Hands and knees on the ground again. Siren and crack skull sounds again. At least we've got TV. Some went north quick that night, riddled with so much fright, Some stayed and stand and fight, might they be better than me? 'Cause I'm completely miserable, completely miserable, completely miserable. Why don't you join me? Some say practice self-care, that's right. Drink tea and sleep, there, that's right. Do yoga, don't stay up all night. See friends to chat and eat. Others now pray all day, okay. Faith in good keeps the bad at bay. Don't get mad, we've been had, they say this ain't defeat. Then why am I completely miserable? Completely miserable. Completely miserable. Why don't you join me? Living in misery. Fascism's back in town again. Hands and knees on the ground again. Siren and crack skull sounds again. At least we've got TV. Got corporate fascist TV. What's the damn point of news on TV? It's the same as an online screen or social media memes. We're all living in a psycho dream. So I'm completely miserable. Completely miserable. Completely miserable. Why don't you join me? We'll have our own private pity party. Why don't you join me?
Wow.
Okay, off key and punk. There we go.
No, that was so wonderful. I find like I'm so glad you chose that one over the Chicago DJ remix because of what's happening right now and what you mentioned about just how fragile like what we have is, and thinking about the voter suppression that's happening in Georgia and all the laws that they want to pass there. I'm grateful. I feel like, you know, it's waves, right? And that poem, we felt that at one point, and we might feel it again, right? Because that's what they're trying to do, is just push us down. I also think that you do touch on other themes in the book that are hard to talk about. One of them being race. And you have one particular poem. It's a really small poem, but it's super concise and important. I found it incredibly important. It's called White Latinx. And yeah, I think like for white passing Latinx folks and Afro-Latinx folks, their experiences are so radically different, and it creates like a disconnect and even a sort of a mishandling that can at times be really violent towards non-white Latinx folks. And I don't know, that's been my experience. I don't know if it's been yours, but I thought that the poem was important. I thought that you did a kind of kindness through this poem. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit on Latinidad and race and some of the experiences that you've had, or what brought you to the page to write this really small and gorgeous poem, which is really lyrical too, and just image bound, which I appreciated.
Yeah, so that poem, it was really hard to write, but it is after Jenny Capo Cruzet's My Time Among the Whites, and she talks about going to this ranch where because she's a white Latina, she feels that she's passed. And these folks say some slurs about Mexicanos in front of her. And what I'm posing in the poem is that they know exactly what's up. And a lot of times white Latinos believe that people are saying these kinds of things in front of them because they've passed, but the poem is suggesting that maybe you haven't passed and they know exactly who you are, but they are they're testing the waters, or they're basically saying, okay, we're going to say this and see how you react to make sure that you're with us. And I find that my experience is a bit complicated because because I'm mixed race and because my skin color is seen differently by so many different people. I identify as a mixed race Afro-Latina, but there are some folks who would never see me as Black. And there are some folks who would never see me as white, and there were some folks that would never see me. So it's very challenging to walk through this earth with my skin tone, because I get people wanting to interpret what I am. Now, it's not to say that it's any more difficult than the next person. In fact, I feel like in terms of colorism, folks who are highly pigmented are going to encounter more racism hands down than I will ever encounter. You know, I've yelled at cops and not felt afraid. I will put it that way. Okay. So that is a stark difference. So I am not in any way saying that my experience is the hardest in any way, shape, or form. I'm saying that that I am in a space where people have expected me to identify as white, and they have said certain things in front of me, and I have called them out on it. People have assumed that I don't identify as Black, even though it's obvious that I am. And I feel like I've also been in spaces where people were so invested in whiteness that when I walked into the room, I was definitely treated as other and as ignorant, as the help, as everything. I've been called the N-word, all those things. So I feel like I'm in this particular place where I can say, hey, white Latinos, I know what you've experienced. It's not that you're passing. You're not fooling anybody, least of all yourself. And you really just need to decide whether you are for humanity or not. And I understand not being able to speak up in a certain situation because you're in danger. That I understand. Don't say anything if you're in danger. But if you can say something, you absolutely must. So that's really where I was coming from. And I was coming from, you know, I grew up with a lot of, I mean, I'm half Cuban, half Colombian. I was born in Chicago. I grew up with a lot of white Cubanos. And we know that you're racist. You know, not all Cubanos are racist, but we know that many white Cubanos are racist. Y'all need to own that shit. Sorry, I said it.
Thank you. You know, I'm half Cuban too, so I absolutely understand what you're talking about. And I'm glad that you were able to like put White Latinx poem into context, just for when people try to enter the work and read that poem. I am grateful that you are willing to just have those conversations that are really, really difficult. Not a lot of folks want to engage in that way. I think we have a few more minutes, and I want to really pivot into joy, and I want to end there. I think Rumi said something about like sorrow prepares us for joy. And so what brings you joy? What are the ways in which you engage in that practice daily? And if you have a poem that you feel you haven't read that speaks to that joy, I'd love to hear it so I could close us out.
Yeah, you know what? So many things bring me joy. Good music, good friends, good work, being in a classroom and seeing students discover and just really discover that they have it all within them and that they can self-direct their learning. You know, some students come in knowing that, but when there are students who are not sure of it, and then you see them blossom into that, wow, what joy. So I would love to end with a love poem, and let me just find it.
You are never going to hear me say don't read a love poem, because that's my jam. I'll eat up any love poem. So yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so this poem was one of the poems that I wrote for celebrating 20 years of Black girlhood. the Lauryn Hill Reader. So this is after Lauryn Hill's Nothing Even Matters. And it's basically about the couple that doesn't care about the world. And it reminded me of the couple in 100 Years of Solitude, where they're just busy being newlyweds, and they forget to do anything, and they're just like in their house. And so anyway, it reminded me of that, and it reminded me of my own partnership as well, especially the early years when we didn't have as many responsibilities as today. So this is called Nothing But Us. We're like the Garcia Marquez couple in 100 Years, bound together in bed, reading Spanglish on each other's backs, palabras woven like warm quilt of Afro diaspora. We ignore the outside world of mayhem and fallen tower chaos. My leg stubble mimics the brush on your face, combing the deep black sand of my body. The only chains here are our ancestors' bones linked. We embrace candle wax lullabies, lighting our irises, flowers open and close like breathing. Your warmth moist in my lungs. I howl at 3 a.m. to stars that burst under eyelids. You echo with ocean song of salt and seaweed. We don't care that the mail has formed a ski slope. Words avalanche onto peach lemonade porch, sunset, resting without shame. Let the job wonder why we have abandoned paperwork and bureaucracy. Free time is the ultimate goal of the indentured. I find centuries in your face, hieroglyphs scrolled under your tongue when you say forever. This moment will and will not end, depending on the immovable mountain of dewy violets we gather and snuggle atop of, turning pink and purple ourselves with blood surfacing under brown skin, hot and laughing at any notion of what might wither.
Grisel, thank you so much for choosing me again. And it's been an honor to be here with you today. Thank you. And thank you, audience, for listening.
Yes, thank you, audience, for joining us. And thank you, Yesenia. And this has been wonderful. You're wonderful, Yesenia. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it.